A lot of times, you guys are in the medical profession, you're helping people. There are scenarios where people come to you where they need a procedure done. Let's say it's a small surgery. It's not a big thing, but if they don't do it, they're going to cause themselves a lot more pain later and a lot more damage. I don't know if it's because the word tax and the words IRS, if you put the IRS together, it spells theirs. And so I think that sometimes we get in a mentality like that we don't want to deal with it. We just rather ignore it. But just a little tiny bit of work, just a little bit of knowledge on the front end can save you so much more. We do this example when we teach people of a scenario. If you took $1 and you double it every year for 20 years, you have $1 million. Okay. Now that's not reality because we have to pay taxes on our earnings. So if you take that $1 and you start doubling it, but you pay taxes on it every time it doubles, after 20 years, instead of $1 million, you only have $23,000. Taxes are the biggest expense in your life. It exceeds what you pay for everything else, your house, your transportation, clothing, food combined. Don't you think it deserves a little bit of attention? If you can just decrease it a little bit, if you could save for 10 grand in taxes a year, invest that in the stock market, for 20 years at an 11% return, you're at like 900 grand in extra retirement income from no additional work, really. Once you kind of get that ball rolling and start implementing what we talk about today. It's just, it's free money to be had if you just do it.
Well, it's not that it's free money. It's money you have rightfully earned and should be keeping. And instead, because of your ignorance, and what I mean by ignorance is simply a lack of knowledge, because of ignorance, we let that money go. It flies through our fingers and goes to someone else. And right now, that money's going to theirs, like we just heard.
It's a charitable contribution to a government entity.
There you go. A charitable contribution to a government entity.
Welcome to the Doctor's Mentor Show. If you believe that medicine is an industry and not a profession, if you enjoy submitting complex reimbursement claims, or you would do another residency just for fun, be advised, you're about to be offended. You should probably leave now.
All this talk about mentoring doctors is ridiculous. I thought doctors learned to do everything better than everyone else the first year of medical school. At least that's the way they act.
If you love assisting patients with vitality breakthroughs, if the right to practice medicine without interference is important, and you want expert tips for practice freedom and profits to support your epic life, welcome aboard and prepare to be blown away. The Doctor's Mentor Show starts now. Here's your host, Dr. Lori Barr.
With all the new tax changes, it's hard to figure out what still applies and what doesn't. And the last thing you want to do as a busy doctor is to make records and keep records that you no longer need because of the lack of itemized deductions. Let's get some clarity around what's relevant now with new tax laws and how you can easily keep track of your expenses and your mileage every single day, right in your pocket.
Today's episode is brought to you by TaxSpot. TaxSpot mileage and expense tracking system. Automatically track your miles, take photos of receipts, and reconcile with your bank to find missing deductions. And TaxSpot University. TaxSpot University is an engaging online course taught by former IRS agent and CPA Sandy Bodkin. The course is designed to teach the most critical things needed by the self-employed individual. For your special offer, go to www.taxbot.com/doctor.
Today I have with me Jake Randall. He's the CEO and co-founder of TaxBot. He started his career doing investment banking and mergers and acquisitions. He's since started several companies in industries ranging from software to boating accessories. He's ghostwritten hundreds of articles and even some books for the financial industry. His real passion, though, is helping people automate their accounting, which everybody loves, don't we, through TaxBot. Welcome, Jake.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
When did TaxBot first start? Remind me.
Let's see. I think we started in 2011. I think is when we started.
If you're not familiar with Sandy Bodkin, he is a guy who used to work for the IRS, and one year he had to do his parents' taxes, and he figured out they were missing out on money they could be keeping legally just because they didn't know how to keep their records properly. So he started educating people about how to do that. And I've been a follower of Sandy's for a long time, as has Jake. And Jake had this brilliant idea to go into business with Sandy and automate what Sandy was already teaching and make it easy for people to implement. And that's how TaxBot was born. And I was so grateful when that happened. And the product has just gotten better and better over time. How did you come up with the idea to do that?
Oh, thanks. It was a fascinating journey, but I'll give you the shorter story. But so I met Sandy as part of another business venture, and we were recording some of his education where he was teaching people about how to save money on their taxes. And I was listening to that recording, and my mind just like melted. I was like so impressed because his point was that most self-employed people, doesn't matter what industry you're in, are overpaying their taxes, and it's not by a little, it's by a lot. He was teaching people how to do this education or about the tax laws and what they needed to do and all the tips and tricks and loopholes, or if you want to call them that. But then at the end, he was saying, documentation is really important. You need to make sure you button yourself up and have good records. Otherwise, all these deductions could be disallowed. At the time, back in the day, it was great, right? It was before technology. But he had this like day planner type solution where it was like this, big thing where you're supposed to write down thing. And it was all outlined to make sure that you stayed compliant with the IRS. It asked all the questions, right, and stuff. And anyway, as technology was evolving and the smartphone had come out and things were getting a little bit better. And anyway, Sandy and I were working on this other project, and I just said, Sandy, we got to turn that into software. That would be so much better than carrying. I'd pay $200 just not to carry around that binder. And that's how it kind of got started. So we got into the app business and started taking the compliance pieces that he had developed over years and years of study and working at the IRS and trying to turn it into a simple to use app that would make sure you stay compliant.
And the beauty about you and Sandy working together and the rest of the amazing team there who are the executives at TaxBot is even with rapid implementation of change, like the new tax laws we have just now, you guys have done an amazing job of keeping your customers informed of changes, keeping your software up to date. How many man hours did it take to redo TaxBot University and in what period of time?
Oh man. So just for a little bit of background, our TaxBot University is a course that we teach where we take small business owners, self-employed people, and teach them all these strategies that Sandy teaches in a very short period of time. So the new tax law started coming out, right? We started seeing drafts of it, and Sandy and I were like furiously reading the bills and all the analysis out there. And we didn't know there was all these changes, and then finally it kind of passed, right, in December. And so as soon as it passed, we kind of went in, looked at all our notes that we compared. I don't even know how many man hours it took, but I can tell you how many man hours of mine it took probably. But it was like 2 weeks of no sleep and, already having the base that we had done before or very little sleep. And anyway, we cranked it out and I was pretty proud of it because it was like the first real, and today I think it's still the most comprehensive and easy to understand analysis of the tax law and how it changed and what that means for you, what you should actually do with that information rather than just saying, blanket statements that you read in the news.
Right.
But it was a lot.
Yes. So, for me personally, I was introduced to Sandy's material back in the 1990s. And every single year since then, I have updated myself with whatever he's saying, because not only does he break down the law into everyday language that you can understand, even if you're, just a person who never gets out of your house, you also see he gives you enough examples on how to use it that you really understand how it applies to you. And he then encourages you to implement. And that's the beauty of TaxBot. It makes it so easy to implement what these laws can do. For the big picture overview on the new tax law, it seems to me, so let's do our disclaimers. I am a doctor. and I work full-time in radiology. I am not a tax expert. What's your disclaimer?
So I'm the CEO of TaxBot. I also am not, I would say I'm I'm pretty good at taxes because I've studied it for so many years and I've ghostwritten for the financial industry, but I'm not a CPA. So you should always we always just say, go talk to your tax professional because your situation is different. We're giving sort of general advice, but you may have some sort of like skeleton in your incorporation documents or something like that I don't know about. And so you should always seek competent professional advice when implementing the stuff that we're doing. So,
and just another reminder for people if they don't know, your accountant, it's not their job to show you where you can save money on your taxes. In fact, that's kind of against what they're supposed to do. So it's on you to bring a recommendation to them if you want to start saving on your taxes differently, and the documentation that's going to support you if you do get audited. And that's another thing I've always loved about Sandy. He quotes that tax law and you have it right there available. So with that in mind, it seems to me, with my little radiology brain, that the one big takeaway from the new tax law is if you don't have a side hustle, if you're not an independent contractor, if you don't have Schedule C income, if you don't have some kind of a side business, there's never been a better time than now to get into that. Is that accurate?
Oh, absolutely. So depending on what your scenario is, but if you can be an independent contractor, like if there's a case for that, man, it just got so much better. And the real reason is, if we've all heard about the corporate tax rates being lowered, and that applies to C corporations, which I think we'll talk a little bit more about later. But then if you're not a C corporation, so if you're an S corporation, or, sometimes you're a limited or a professional corporation, but set up as an S corporation, right? Or an LLC or sole proprietor, whatever you are, they created this new 20% tax deduction. That basically what it means, and there are some limitations and things like that, but let's say you take 20% of the net income from your business, essentially. So I'm going to use really easy numbers to make my math easy. But let's say you have $100,000 of net income from your business. Well, now there's this extra 20% deduction. So you can take 20% of that $100,000 of that you are claiming as net income, and you get to take a $20,000 deduction on your personal tax return. So we've never had anything like that before, but all of a sudden now you're taking 20% of that income and just taking it as a deduction. I mean, it's a really profitable thing. We ran some numbers on one person as a case study that was making about $115,000, I think, a year. And with the new tax law, same expenses, they were paying twice as much taxes if before in the old tax code as they were in the new tax code.
Wow.
So it was crazy. So the key is that 20% deduction. And then the other part of that is that the tax rates for most people got lowered, right? So you're getting taxed on less and it's at a lower rate. So it makes it much more profitable, more than it ever has been before as far as that goes. So it's a fantastic opportunity. If you don't have anything like that, then you need to get some rental properties or side business or something.
So, and that's an important distinction, because I know when you look at that 20%, service industries, especially health and law, it doesn't apply if you're in those industries unless you have below a certain amount of income. Correct?
Correct. People have a hard time remembering like the exact dollar amount. So I just say roughly when you get to about 150,000 personal or 315 or 320,000 as a married filing jointly, around those numbers, it starts to phase out for certain industries, right? So if you're a high income earner, you're going to run into those limits. But there's a trick. It's actually really good for high income earners. When you start hitting those thresholds, yes, you're going to miss out on the 20% deduction. But if you're not set up as a C corporation, if you're making that kind of money and you set up yourself as a C corporation, you don't get the 20%, but now you get your flat tax rate is at 21% rather than you're hitting your personal tax rates on the pass-through income. So for high income people in those specified service businesses that the IRS sort of excluded in their law, if you just become a C corporation, then you avoid it all, and then you're not bound by those limits and those phase outs. So it might be an interesting thing for a lot of your people.
The other important distinction that people may misunderstand if they're just Googling this and finding information is That 20% is for every type of business. So let's say you did have a high income earning healthcare practice. You're in a C Corp with your business. The 20% would not apply to money you bring home from that business. However, let's say you also have real estate investments. Your real estate business, as long as it's set up as one of those entities, not a C Corp, and as long as your income didn't exceed that threshold, right?
So it's based on per business, right? So It's your qualified business income from that business. The rules for real estate are a little bit more fuzzy, and I think the IRS is going to have to clarify them a little bit more. But like in a general business, let's say you had a side hustle of some sort, and you make that $100,000 in addition to your healthcare business. Well, you get to take that 20% on your qualified business income from that business, as long as it meets the requirements, which is like, so you wouldn't from the healthcare one, but from the other one you would. And if you had 5 businesses that were in that same share, you could take the 20% for the 5 businesses,
right?
And apply them.
Which is what people can easily overlook if they're not following you guys.
Yeah. Because they just think that, I'm limited to this one pigeonholed business that I've got.
Right. So that's just phenomenal. And I'm so excited about that. Now, I think the other big picture thing is it's easier than ever to keep records. And that brings us back to TaxBot. Tell me, what is the biggest mistake that you see busy professionals like doctors making when it comes to accounting in general or keeping track of their own personal versus business income and expenses?
So there's a couple things. One of the things I see with doctors a lot is they have a person, right? They have a person who manages the stuff. They have a person that's managing their finances and their accounting and some of those things. And oftentimes that person is not necessarily like the right qualified person to do it. and they're not, up to date on all the regulations and stuff. So the biggest issue from a compliance standpoint is also the biggest problem from a implementation. So sometimes they'll have a financial planner in any industry, right? Sometimes you're so busy as a doctor that you can't be an expert at everything, right? But they don't take time to usually understand some of the basics about taxes. And those doctors that do, but if you learn the top 5 deductions for your business, and you get to know those top 5 really well, my goodness, it is night and day in what you save, because your accountant, like you said before, isn't like coming to you and saying, I have a couple of great ideas for you. It's usually you coming to the accountant saying, I've heard that I can do this. Is this possible? And the accountant then takes their knowledge and applies it specifically. It's like in a doctor's office, right? Your doctor just doesn't come in and say, you know what? I've got a couple of things that I think I could do to make your health better. It's usually patient coming in with a problem, right? Although we would love it if we could all live our lives that way in that little utopia. But
I agree.
But from a tracking standpoint, most of them just don't even realize that there is more than an accounting system. And in fact, most accounting systems, here's what won't fly when you get audited. And this is where most people get surprised, is when they do get audited. Because the IRS won 88% of its audits last year. 88%. That's 9 out of 10 almost. And the reason is because people didn't have any documentation beyond like a financial statement. So it's because they don't have things like receipts. If you have expenses, there are a couple of exceptions, but not that many where you don't need receipts. Okay. So backups of all your receipts of all your expenses. If you are deducting anything for your car, mileage logs are a must. And honestly, mileage tracking has been kind of this interesting thing to watch. Most mileage tracking type, if you do it on an app, just make sure that it asks certain things like for a specific purpose of each trip, right? I know that sounds tedious to write down, but that is what the IRS wants. And they can disallow all your vehicle deductions if you don't have, written down things like where you went and what was the business purpose of going there. Things like, client visit are not going to fly. They're going to want say things like, I met with Lori about this tax deduction idea. Keeping good records like mileage logs, receipts, and then keeping, an appointment book. I mean, those 3 things right there, they're not that hard, but those will make all the difference when it comes to staying compliant. And that's really the big deal.
And let me just ask you a quick question about that documentation. In the past, the IRS has said that if you got audited, you had to have paper copies of those things. Is that still accurate?
That is not accurate now. They are accepting digital documentation. I don't know for sure if this is where it stemmed, but I know that there was a big issue during Hurricane Katrina when that came through. And just, obviously, if you had a filing cabinet full of receipts, that was not really worth anything anymore. And, with receipts being on thermal paper and stuff, now you accidentally leave it on your dash and you can't read it anymore. So they actually recommend that you keep digital copies, which is kind of the impetus behind TaxBot. Store it digitally so that you have copies. So that it's stored in multiple locations around the world, so you never have to worry about like losing anything. And that's kind of the big thing is receipts, mileage log, and an appointment book that keeps detailed records about who you're meeting with and stuff.
So talk about how you would get a receipt into TaxBot.
I love the receipt tracking part of TaxBot. This is my baby. And we've got some really cool stuff planned for it in the future, but I don't like keeping track of my accounting, right? Nobody does. It's kind of the boring part of my business. I like counting money, but not like keeping track of the accounting. So with TaxBot, just like any accounting software, you can connect up like a bank account or a credit card that you run your expenses through. Once you have that connected, we have a technology called Smart Match. So all I do is I pull out my phone. Let's say Lori and I go to lunch to celebrate the podcast interview. I grab my phone and I just simply open my phone and I open TaxBot and I take a picture of the receipt. TaxBot can read the text. We've taught it through artificial intelligence. It can read the text off the receipt, and then it will match it up with the right bank transaction when it hits your bank a day or two later. It'll fill in missing details, missing compliance gaps, make one record out of it, and then deliver it back to you and pre-categorized, or at least our best guess at what category it should be. And then all you do is kind of approve it and say, yeah, that's right. And then in some scenarios, like if a meal expense, it might ask you for, a quick description of what did you talk about at this meeting. But it does most of the work for you. And then you're kind of just a reviewer, and rather than like a data input, type it in and all that stuff.
And that's been my experience. I mean, it really makes it so easy. If somebody just either sits down once a month and goes through, or even better yet, if you just spend 12 minutes a day, not when you're sitting in traffic because you don't want to use your phone when you're in traffic, but there's little times and one time that people don't take advantage of that it's possible is, if you feel like you don't have any time in your day, you do go to the bathroom sometime. You're sitting there, you can do this. Yeah. It's a few minutes. And if you spend just 12 to 15 minutes a day, it can make a huge difference in you getting that documentation in a timely fashion, which is more defensible if you are audited. Mm-hmm. And making sure that you haven't missed any opportunities. And what I love too about TaxBot is it reminds you of opportunities you have. And it's called a bot for a reason. It does take advantage of AI. We've talked about AI and its implications for the future for us before on this show. And this is a really good implementation of AI, in my opinion.
One thing you mentioned too, that a lot of busy, some of our busier clients, right? It's more about capturing the receipt up front, right? So if they will take pictures of their receipts, and then they'll actually have their assistant do the classification, like the review process later. But that process never gets started unless the person who's responsible takes the picture of the receipt, right? And then we do also connect to a lot of people are going to email receipts these days. So we do connect to your email and pull in receipts. I think we're doing a pretty great job there. We are about ready to release a new version of the email receipts that's going to catch a lot more, because occasionally we miss one. There's a lot of emails there to go that sometimes we miss, but that is another thing too. So if you buy something at the store, you don't even have to take a picture of the receipt. It just sucks it right in.
And one way to really implement that clearly for a program like this is to set aside a particular email address that you only use for your receipts.
Do you want me to talk about the mileage tracking real quick and share how that works?
Yes. And and one thing I want you to address is when I put out a call for questions that my listeners might want me to ask you, is there are some reviews out there about TaxBot that criticize the mileage tracking. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that as well, because that was a specific question that we got.
The way that we run, it's a trade-off, right? We don't want to use any of your battery. We don't have to. And so we make sure we run in a low power state. But just like your fitness tracker, right? I've got an Apple Watch, tracks how many steps I take. The phone gives us certain cues. Yeah, perfect. So the phone gives us certain cues about what's going on in your life. And when the phone tells us that you might be driving, we spin up your GPS and we start checking your speed and we start tracking a trip for you. So you don't have to remember to do it, because if you're like me, you get in the car, you're thinking about your next meeting, you're not thinking about tracking your mileage. So you get in the car, you drive.
Wait, 1 second. Yeah. I just have to interrupt for a minute. Be careful how fast you run to a code in the hospital, because I have had TaxBot give me an alert on my phone when I've been moving very fast in the hospital on foot. So just a heads up there.
Track your mileage for you. Then at the end of when you have time, you can come back, and each trip has a card on the phone you can see, and it shows a map of the trip. It shows the date and the time of the trip, the mileage. If you have an appointment on your calendar that's at the same time, it'll actually pull in details from your calendar to say, this is probably the event. So you can match it up. And so it tries to do as much of the work as it can. Then you simply go back at the end of the day and say, yeah, this one was business, this one was business. And then, that was a personal trip. And you separate the two. But now you have a defined mileage log that is approved of by the IRS. And it makes sure that it asks you, if it doesn't have a reason for the trip, it'll ask you for one. Like, what was the reason for this trip? Because that is where people's mileage logs get in trouble. I am assuming that the person that you're talking about is an Android user, because that's usually where we hear the complaint. There's so many different Android devices out there and so many different software providers, and it's open source. So let's say you have an AT&T phone, Android, Samsung. So Samsung took the original code and changed it for their purposes. And then AT&T took the code and changed it for their original purposes. And so sometimes we do have a little bit more complexity to deal with. If you haven't called if any of your people haven't called customer service, call them, because they can usually resolve that. But it is, a function of sometimes hardware when that does happen. But normally we're able to get it fixed with some settings adjustments, or maybe you have a setting turned off, like if you have your an app killer, a task killer on your phone. Sometimes that will interfere with some things, but for the most part, and when we did, it is an evolving process, and we've gotten a lot better at releasing quick updates to take care of that. It's not very often we hear those calls anymore. Yeah,
in general, I mean, the GPS issues that I've seen, not just with TaxBot, but any mileage tracker or activity tracker, is sometimes when you're moving between cell towers, it'll drop out. Or there's one spot in Austin that I got behind, and this has happened to me more than once. If I get behind a school bus or a garbage truck, my mileage tracker, no matter, because I've used several and compared them over the years, no matter what I'm doing, it drops out and thinks I've arrived somewhere. And it'll mark that spot and then take me back on the trip as soon as we start moving a little bit faster. But what I've found with TaxBot is once I educate it and tell it that, no, this is all one trip, then the next time I go by there, it doesn't make that mistake again. So sometimes some of those things you can overcome with that. And then,
and we are investing in artificial, a lot in artificial intelligence. So it as you use TaxBot, it actually gets better. It starts to learn some of your patterns. It learns how you categorize things. It learns different patterns and then adjusts some of the settings to make sure that it gives a better people to hear about it. But my ultimate goal would be, and we're not there, but I really believe that one day with artificial intelligence, we can get to zero data entry accounting. And that is what I would love to do, and staying compliant.
And just a side note, as the doctor's mentor here, since I am encouraging doctors to fully monetize their degrees and really understand the potential, I want to point out that here is a co-founder of a company, a CEO of a company who isn't satisfied with the status quo and has a radical big vision of what's possible. Because if you don't think in big picture terms on what's possible and make it very expansive, you won't get as close, right?
Yeah.
So that is so critical, and I'm so glad that you share that with us, because that's beautiful. I'm glad to hear you're headed in that direction. That sounds good to me.
Thank you. It's kind of fun. It's a lot of fun. I'm learning a lot.
So if there's one secret that every doctor ought to know about taxes, what would that one secret be, in your opinion?
So I think that with doctors specifically, the secret, and actually this applies to more than doctors and stuff, but the secret to getting what you deserve on your taxes really comes down to four steps. It's having a roadmap, okay? And there's super easy roadmap points that I'll share with you, but nobody does them. And if you just do them, my goodness, you will be amazed. Okay, so number one, find a remarkable accountant, not just your brother-in-law or something like that knows how to file taxes. Make sure it's the right person. They better know your industry. They better be full time. I mean, there's some things you want to look for, but they better be remarkable. You want the good ones. Professional as well, right? You want to be paid well as a doctor. Pay for a good accountant. You shouldn't be doing your own taxes. So that's number one. So find a remarkable accountant. But in reality, the step two will come before that, because you need to learn, like I said before, at least the top 5 deductions for your business, and you better know them inside and out. It doesn't take that long to get up and going on that. And we can share some information about how you can get some of that information from TaxBot here in a little bit. But once you have a base of your tax of what's possible, then you can go to that remarkable accountant and they can do remarkable work for you. It's a team effort. It's like playing doubles tennis. It's just not drop off your stuff at the end of the year. I always like to say, don't treat your accountant like a gym membership, because a lot of people have really great ambitions. They go in once a year in January to get their workout done, and then they fall off the bandwagon. We always go to our tax accountants once a year and say, save me the most money, right? It doesn't work that way. So find a remarkable accountant, get a crash course in taxes, learn the top 5 deductions. Number 3, plan for an audit. We ran the statistics. Your chances of an audit, if you're in business for 20 years, your chances of an audit are somewhere between 33% and 72%. If you're a high income earner, you're going to be up on the upper end of that. Okay. So it's probably going to happen at some point. So just plan for it. Get some sort of good tracking software in place, like TaxBot. If you have another one that you like, just make sure you know what you need, like for meal type expenses, and make sure that you are forcing your accounting software to be compliant, because most of them don't worry about compliance. You can do it if you take the extra steps, but it doesn't actually push you towards that. But so that's number 3. Plan for an audit. Just keep your tracking compliant. And here's where the magic happens. When you have a great accountant, when you have your a base of knowledge and you have your tracking implemented, it's almost like you're going to see a different side of your accountant. They have ideas that they've not been willing to share with you because you're not buttoned up, right? And you get to this new level up with accounting, and you're going to find that accountants will be more willing to come up with ideas and create things, because they're not also spending time doing all the paperwork, right? Doing data entry and filling in gaps that you haven't done. And at this point, usually you want to make sure you also add to your team. Most of you probably already have one, but you want to make sure you add the right financial advisor at this point, because at this point, you're going to start saving a ton of money in taxes, and you're going to have money to invest in stuff. And you want to do that wisely. So those 4 things. So it takes a little bit of work, but not a ton. But I guarantee every minute you spend on that, you'll probably see 5 times return on investment.
About this time, the perfectionists in my listening audience, or the little bit of perfectionists that the rest of us, reform perfectionists, have still on board, may be saying, oh my goodness, here it is, already into the year, and I didn't start on January 1st. Is there any downside to starting today, whatever today may be, in getting the right documentation in place? And is there anything, will TaxBot help to kind of fill in some gaps? How far back can you go? You obviously can't fill in mileage gaps unless you've got it handwritten somewhere. But could you do the expenses and the income gaps, pulling it in from your accounts? How does that work?
Great questions. I think the most important step in a journey is the next one. Because if you haven't started your journey, then the first one is the next one. But if you've already taken one step and then you stop, it's not that important, right? It's the next step that's the most important. So start somewhere. Right? Start today. If you didn't do it in January, then start today, because it's still the best time to start. But we can't help. So with TaxBot, you can upload previous bank statements to TaxBot and import them. If you have a shoebox full of receipts, you can snap pictures of all those receipts, and we'll do all the matching for you and bring it up to par. And then you can classify those expenses. So you can go back that way. With mileage, it's a little bit different, right? But there is an interesting rule. We don't like to, I would say, use it to get, fill a gap for this year. We don't recommend it going forward. But there is an IRS rule where if your business is not seasonal, which I imagine most doctors don't have a seasonal business. Maybe it's pretty steady throughout the year. People get hurt and need help year round. So you can keep a 90-day log. It's got to be 90 days. You don't miss a day. But if you keep a log for 90 days, the IRS will let you take that and multiply by 4. So for your mileage, it's an estimate version, right? But you can do that. And so I would say start today, track your mileage for 90 days or through the rest of the year. It's even better if you take a longer period of time. So if you started tracking today and you went through the end of the year, we just finished quarter 1. So you'd have 3 quarters, and then you could do the math to add the average for another quarter to get that number.
So let's talk about how people, if they wanted to get started with TaxBot, what would be the best thing for them to do right now?
Great. So we have a couple things. We talked about the 4 steps, right? And we can help you with those 4 steps. One, we have an article on our blog, and if you want to go check it out, that gives you like the 10 questions to ask to interview an accountant. So that'll help you find your right accountant if you don't feel like you have him right now, or him or her. For learning your tax knowledge, like you can go out and search the internet and find like articles, and if you have time for that, great. But if you want a really easy way to just get caught up on the tax laws, what's new in 2018, and how to actually, the strategy to implement it, we do have a course that we put together called TaxBot University. And it's normally, a $400 course, but we'll offer for, listeners to your show here. So we do have that, right? So it's you can get that for $200, and it's just the most amazing content you'll ever see about taxes.
It is amazing.
And it makes it simple, right? It's not like talking in CPA language, and it's trying to make it really knowledgeable and actionable. Best way to get it in a quick amount of time. We do have TaxBot, our software, and you can also get that and try that. Start a 2-week free trial. I'm going to send you we have this link, taxbot.com/doctor. So if you go there, you can get access to all the specials that we have for listening to Lori's show here. Yeah, TaxBot, you can try that for free for 2 weeks. You can bundle them and get them even better to offer, a better deal. But it's really a great value. And the average person that uses both of those things, we run numbers separately. But, if you go through TaxBot University, the average person, when we've done surveys, the average person across all industries, across all things, right, finds an extra $20,000 in tax deductions the following year on the same amount.
$20,000. Yeah. That's a nice trip somewhere. That's a nice nest egg for retirement. That's a nice nest egg for saving for your child's education.
Yeah. And that's independent of using TaxBot too. And then our TaxBot users also have, they usually find $10,000 on their own. So there's probably some balance in between there of hybrid that I just don't know what the number is. But it's a great deal, and we'd love to have you check it out. We want you to be happy. Everything's got a 30-day money-back guarantee. Take the course. If you don't feel like we provided at least 5 times the value, call us up. We'll give you a refund. That's who we are.
That's a total win-win offer. I think it's really important for people to realize here that as a busy doctor, an hour of your time is worth whatever you're being paid right now for that hour. Now, you can absolutely go out there and you can find similar information on the internet, a lot of free information about taxes, and you can absolutely set up Excel spreadsheets and all kinds of other things to support your documentation in exactly the ways that Jake has shared with us. The whole point of me wanting to make sure that TaxBot was featured on this show is I'm all about helping you take the fastest path to monetizing your knowledge and having more time freedom doing things you love with people you love. I'm willing to, I'm not a betting lady, but I'm willing to guess that you don't want to spend your time working on your taxes with your loved ones. You'd rather be doing something else. So this is a way to decrease the pain significantly. And as the years go on, hopefully take away the pain completely in this aspect of our life with these amazing tools. So Jake, thank you so much for taking the time to explain a little bit about the new tax laws, to show us a way that we can use artificial intelligence to assist us in doing our best at documenting our legal abilities to save on our taxes by proper documentation, and just being delightful as a human being, too. We appreciate that you're bringing this to the world, and you're just a great guy.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you for doing this. This is such a great service that you're providing for your doctors.
Your next step.
Here are your next steps. Number 1, go to www.taxbot.com/doctor, and you can sign up and take advantage of the offer that Jake has described here today. And your next step is look around at your financial situation, at your accounting, and see if the expertise of your current accountant matches your level of complexity in what you've created for not only your practice, but any other side hustles you're doing. because the more side hustles you have, the more complicated those taxes are. So it may be an opportunity to level up. And number 3, if you're a business owner, think about what an amazing gift it would be to share something like TaxBot with your employees and the Tax University opportunity. Because as a owner, to implement that for everybody in your company and give them that knowledge to personally own their money better, it's an amazing gift. So just think about those 3 things and go to www.taxbot.com/doctor to get this amazing offer. So Jake, again, this has been delightful. Thank you so much for your time and for your knowledge and for your desire to really make things easy for people so that they love having more money at their disposal to spend it doing things they love with people they love instead of wasting their time doing things that are painful.
You betcha. Thank you so much for having me. It's really been a treat.
Are you stopping at a hospital? Hello? Don't you know that hospitals are one of the sickest places on the planet? Don't touch anything in there and get out as fast as you can.